The atmosphere in the packed conference hall was electric, charged with the kind of restless energy that only a high-stakes confrontation could bring. The event had been hyped for weeks. Elon Musk, the tech mogul, the self-proclaimed free speech advocate, was about to sit down for a one-on-one discussion with one of his most vocal critics. Every seat in the room was filled, and cameras from major media outlets were trained on the stage, ready to capture every second. People weren't just here for an interview. They were here for a battle. Musk, as always, seemed completely unaffected by the weight of the moment. He sat at the center of the stage, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, his signature style. No suit, no tie, no attempt to play the part of a corporate executive. He wasn't here to impress anyone. His posture was relaxed, almost too relaxed. One leg rested casually over his knee, and his fingers drummed lightly on the armrest of his chair. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he glanced over the audience. He had done this before. Countless interviews, countless attempts by the media to corner him, to force him into a misstep. He had played this game and won more times than he could count. Tonight would be no different. The massive screen behind him displayed the event's title in bold, sleek letters. Freedom of speech in the digital age. A conversation with Elon Musk. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A few feet away, the evening's interviewer, Daniel Kessler, adjusted his microphone and cleared his throat. Unlike Musk, Kessler looked the part of a serious journalist. He was dressed sharply in a fitted navy blue suit, his tie perfectly knotted. His face carried the calm, confident expression of a man who had done his homework, who knew exactly which buttons to press. Daniel Kessler was no amateur. As a senior correspondent for one of the biggest liberal news networks in the country, he had built a reputation for his sharp, aggressive interview style. He was known for pushing back, for holding the powerful accountable, or at least. That's how his fans saw it. His critics, on the other hand, accused him of being little more than a political attack dog, a man who cared more about crafting a viral gotcha moment than honest journalism. Kessler had come prepared. He had studied Musk's past interviews, his tweets, his business ventures, and his controversies. He had spent the last week sharpening his questions, refining them into intellectual weapons that he was ready to deploy the moment Musk let his guard down. But Musk wasn't an easy opponent. The audience, a mix of journalists, corporate insiders, activists, and fans, sat in tense anticipation. Some were here to see Musk humiliated, to watch Kessler dismantle him with a well-timed question that would leave the billionaire speechless. Others were die-hard Musk supporters, ready to cheer the moment he fired back with one of his signature unfiltered, no-nonsense responses. Everyone had chosen their sides before the interview had even begun. The moment the stage lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the discussion, a hush fell over the crowd. Kessler leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and smiled slightly as he addressed Musk. "Mr. Musk," he began, his tone smooth but firm. "A lot of people would say that you've changed in recent years. That you've gone from being an admired innovator, someone who wanted to change the world for the better, to something else entirely. A provocateur, a disruptor. Some even argue that your actions, particularly on your social media platform, have made you a threat to democracy itself. How do you respond to that?" The audience tensed. Kessler had just thrown the first punch, and it was a hard one. Musk blinked. Then, without missing a beat, he chuckled. "That's an interesting way to start," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I was expecting at least one actual question before the insult started." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, but Kessler didn't flinch. This was exactly what he wanted. He was just getting started. The air in the auditorium was thick with tension. The audience, a volatile mix of Musk supporters, tech insiders, and skeptical journalists, leaned in as the conversation took its first sharp turn. Daniel Kessler, the seasoned journalist, had come prepared. His opening question had been an accusation wrapped in concern, an intellectual ambush designed to force Musk into a defensive position. But Musk wasn't playing defense. Not yet. He sat back in his chair, relaxed, an amused smirk flickering across his face. His fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. The billionaire was at ease, as if this was nothing more than another day at the office. Kessler, however, was relentless. He adjusted his tie, his tone sharpened. "You call yourself a free speech advocate, Mr. Musk. But many argue that your approach to running Twitter, pardon me, X, has created an environment where misinformation and hate speech thrive. You claim to support open dialogue, but isn't that just an excuse for amplifying dangerous voices? Musk exhaled sharply, the closest thing to a laugh without actually making a sound. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking on to Kessler's. Ah, so now free speech is dangerous. Fascinating. Kessler didn't flinch. Speech has consequences. Do you deny that? Musk shrugged. Of course speech has consequences. Bad ideas get challenged. Good ideas rise to the top. That's how debate works. The problem is, you people in the media don't want debate. You want control. The audience murmured. A few scattered claps. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Kessler narrowed his eyes. That's a bold accusation, Mr. Musk. Musk leaned back. Not an accusation, just an observation. Kessler pressed on. You've reinstated accounts banned for spreading conspiracy theories. You've removed moderation policies designed to protect marginalized groups. At what point does free speech become recklessness? Musk smirked. You make it sound like I personally sit there pressing buttons, deciding who speaks and who doesn't. We have policies. They're just not dictated by activists pretending to be journalists. The jab landed. The room reacted, some with laughter, others with barely concealed outrage. Kessler's lips tightened. So you admit it? That your version of free speech is selective? Musk tilted his head, pretending to think. I admit that I don't censor people just because they say things you don't like. Big difference. The tension crackled. Kessler knew he needed to regain control. You've said before that Twitter X is the world's digital town square, he said, his voice calm but firm. That makes you one of the most powerful unelected individuals on the planet. Who holds you accountable? Musk's smirk widened. Ah, the too much power argument. Let's talk about that. He shifted in his chair, his posture suddenly more engaged. You're saying I have much influence. But let me ask you, who holds you accountable? When your network pushes a false story, who fact-checks you? Who bans you for spreading misinformation? Kessler hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Musk pounced. The truth is, you don't want free speech, Musk said. You want controlled speech. Speech that benefits you. Anything else you label as dangerous. Kessler opened his mouth, but Musk cut him off. Let's test something, Musk continued. Would you be okay if someone fact-checked your network in real time? Not your fact. Checker's actual independent review. How about that? Kessler's jaw tightened. Musk leaned back again, stretching his arms. Didn't think so, he said, smirking. The audience erupted. Kessler clenched his jaw. He wasn't done. But neither was Musk. The room was no longer just an audience, it was an arena. The tension thickened, the division in the crowd more obvious than ever. Some leaned forward, eager to see Musk dismantle the mainstream media's favorite narrative. Others whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, frustrated that the billionaire was slipping through yet another interrogation. Kessler, however, wasn't shaken. He had built a career on moments like this. He wasn't just a journalist. He was a specialist in breaking down powerful men, cornering them with their own words until they tripped over themselves. He wouldn't let Musk walk away unscathed. He adjusted his microphone and leaned in. So, Mr. Musk, let's put your argument to the test, Kessler said, his voice crisp, authoritative. You claim to champion free speech. You claim to fight against censorship. But the reality is, you do decide who stays and who goes on your platform. You do pick winners and losers. You've banned journalists who criticized you. You've deplatformed accounts that challenged your leadership. How is that any different from the so-called media control you claim to oppose? Musk let the words settle. He was in no rush to respond. He studied Kessler, his fingers pressed together, elbows resting on the chair's armrests. Then, with a small tilt of his head, he spoke. First of all, let's correct something, Musk said. I haven't banned journalists for criticizing me. I've banned journalists who doxed my real-time location and put my family at risk. Big difference. But of course, you and your network framed it differently, didn't you? Kessler's jaw tightened. Musk continued, his voice steady, unbothered. Second, if you really believe I have the same power as, say, the media conglomerates that control 90% of what people read, see, and hear, then I have to ask, where's my news network? Where's my Hollywood studio? Where's my influence over government officials? A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Musk's supporters were nodding, smirking. Even some neutrals in the audience seemed to consider the point. Kessler pressed forward. You don't need a news network, Mr. Musk. You have Twitter. You have a direct line to millions of followers. You don't have to go through journalists because you are the media now. You get to bypass scrutiny, spread whatever narrative you choose, and silence voices that challenge you. That is power. Musk let out a short, dry chuckle. Oh, so now, not relying on the media is a problem? He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto Kessler's. See, this is the game. You guys loved it when Twitter was under your control, when it banned the people you didn't like, when it suppressed stories that didn't fit your narrative. But the second I level the playing field, when your side no longer controls the dial suddenly, it's a threat to democracy. Fascinating. Scattered applause. Kessler remained composed. You're dodging the question. You have the power to silence voices just as much as the institutions you criticize. Doesn't that make you a hypocrite? Musk shrugged. If I were silencing voices, you wouldn't be sitting here asking me that question. A beat of silence. More applause, this time louder. A few groans of frustration from the other side of the room. Kessler's expression hardened. What about those who don't have your platform? What about the people who suffer the consequences of your decisions? You say you don't believe in censorship, but your changes to Twitter have allowed hate speech, disinformation, and extremism to flourish. That's not free speech. That's chaos. Musk exhaled sharply through his nose. He was getting bored. Yes, Musk said, shaking his head. The hate speech argument. The last refuge of people who can't win an argument on merit. Look, I don't endorse hate speech. No rational person does. But the problem is that your definition of hate speech is anything you don't like. Kessler opened his mouth to respond, but Musk cut him off. You and your colleagues have spent years labeling completely normal opinions as dangerous. You've called parents extremists for questioning school curriculums. You've called scientists conspiracy theorists for asking the wrong questions during a pandemic. You've called comedians problematic for making jokes. So forgive me if I don't trust you to decide what's acceptable speech. The audience reacted instantly. Some cheered, others shouted in protest. The moderator tried to wave for quiet, but the crowd was no longer just observing, they were invested. Kessler wasn't done. He was prepared for this kind of pushback. He adjusted his tie, his voice firm. So your solution is to let anyone say anything? No regulations, no guardrails? You don't see the danger in that? Musk sighed, rubbing his temple. I see the danger in letting people like you decide what the rules are. Because, here's the truth, Daniel, your industry doesn't believe in free speech. You believe in approved speech. The audience erupted again. Kessler's frustration was now visible. Musk leaned back, crossing his legs. And that, my friend, is why no one trusts you anymore. The room was on fire now. Kessler clenched his jaw, knowing he had one last shot left before the night was over. He wasn't going down quietly. The tension in the room had reached its peak. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were part of it. Some leaned forward, gripping the edges of their seats, eyes darting between Elon Musk and Daniel Kessler like spectators at a heavyweight fight. Others sat back, arms crossed, waiting to see if their chosen side would come out on top. Kessler, though visibly tense, wasn't backing down. He had thrown everything he had at Musk: accusations of hypocrisy, claims of recklessness, warnings about misinformation and unchecked power. And yet, Musk remained standing, unmoved, smirking like a man who had been through far worse. The journalist adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and went for his final attack. You keep saying you're for free speech, Kessler said, his voice lower now, controlled. But what you really mean is speech without consequence. And that's dangerous. Words inspire action. People have been harmed because of lies spread on social media. Hate crimes have surged. Democracy itself is under threat. And yet, you laugh it off. Like this is all just a game to you. So tell me, Mr. Musk, where is the line? Or do you not believe in lines at all? Silence. A loaded question. A trap. The kind of moment Kessler had built his career on. If Musk dismissed the concern outright, he'd look irresponsible. If he admitted that some speech should be limited, he'd contradict himself. But Musk didn't hesitate. The line, Musk said, leaning forward, is personal responsibility. Kessler blinked. The audience quieted. You want to talk about consequences? Musk continued, his voice sharp now, his casual demeanor replaced with something colder. Let's talk about them, but not in the way you want. You see, the problem with your argument, Daniel, is that it assumes people are too stupid to think for themselves. That they're just empty vessels, waiting for someone to fill their heads with dangerous ideas. But that's not how reality works. Kessler opened his mouth, but Musk kept going. People choose what to believe. People choose how to act. And when someone does something terrible, the responsibility belongs to them, not to the words floating around on the internet. Blaming speech is just an excuse for avoiding the uncomfortable truth that evil exists, and no amount of censorship will ever get rid of it. The audience was still. Musk's eyes locked onto Kessler's. And you know that. But you push this dangerous speech narrative anyway. Because if people believe words are the problem, then they'll beg for someone like you to control them, to tell them what's true and what's false, to decide what's safe for them to hear. He tilted his head. And once you have that power, you never let it go, do you? Scattered applause. Some murmurs of discontent. Kessler clenched his jaw. You're making this about control, but it's about responsibility. Kessler shot back. We're talking about real harm. You're pretending this is just a debate, but people's lives are at stake. Musk chuckled, shaking his head. Nice attempt at emotional manipulation, but I don't buy it. His expression darkened. If you actually cared about real harm, you'd talk about what your industry has done. You'd talk about the people who have lost everything because of false stories, biased coverage, and media-driven hysteria. Kessler shifted uncomfortably. How many careers have your networks destroyed with accusations that turned out to be false? How many stories have been buried because they didn't fit the narrative? How many times have you decided who gets to be heard and who doesn't? A few shouts from the audience. Musk gestured toward the cameras. You sit here, pretending to be the voice of reason, but you and your colleagues have spent years shaping public opinion in ways that have caused far more damage than any tweet ever could. And the best part? He smirked. You never take responsibility. Ever. You just move on to the next target. Kessler's face was unreadable now. He had no witty retort, no pre-prepared counterattack that would land as effectively as before. Musk exhaled, then sat back. So don't lecture me about consequences, Daniel. Not when your entire profession is built on avoiding them. Silence. Then applause. It started in pockets, hesitant at first. Then it spread. A wave of claps, cheers, and murmurs of agreement rolling through the room. Not everyone was happy. Of course, some sat rigid, arms crossed, whispering to each other in frustration. But it didn't matter. The energy had shifted. Kessler knew it. Musk stood up, stretching slightly. Anyway, he said casually, this has been fun, but I've got rockets to build. Laughter, more applause. Kessler remained seated, his fingers tight around the armrest of his chair. He had come here to win, to expose Musk. But now, as he watched the billionaire wave to the crowd, stepping off the stage, he realized the truth. Musk had won.